Now I request Professor Cook to kindly share his thoughts.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this event, and it's very rewarding for me to find out more about the work of the Institute and this fascinating and important project. I'm not as familiar with it as my colleague Dan Rycroft is, but I'm rapidly discovering that it's very much in line with the sort of things that we are working with our colleagues at Jadavpur, and I just want to draw your attention to that other project, which is a project about translating minority languages, and in particular respecting the genres of those minority languages, the expressive genres of those languages, and therefore an enterprise that really runs parallel to this enterprise. And I think one of the things that I hope will happen over time is an exploration of the synergies that could exist between the two. I think there's something very productive to be found there. When the famous quotation from Marx was made at the beginning of the talk about ruling ideas, it gave me a kind of thrill of remembrance, because it took me back to the work that I did on Romanticism and ideology, where we used that thought to see the extent to which Romantic literature, as it were, was part of the ruling ideas or not. But I just wanted to qualify that famous utterance in terms of a discovery that I think those of us working at that time made, which it wasn't so much about ruling ideas, is that the arguments of the ruling class are the ruling arguments of the age. In the case of the Romantic period in England, there were arguments over population and its feeding. There were arguments, of course, over slavery, and there were arguments over who was to count as the people. So interesting questions there, which have a certain amount of contemporary resonance. I just want to set that thought to one side, though, because I think it figures into what I find to be the difficulty, to a certain extent, of thinking about the mainstream and the margin. And I want to just say a few words about that. And the way that I want to do that is by drawing attention to an important goal of academic social responsibility, which is inclusiveness. It seems to me that this is a very important idea for the work that we're doing on the translation of minority languages, that these languages should be included in a way that they are currently not. But then that raises a question which has already been broached about included into what? I mean, what is the entity that it is to be included in? And my sense is that, by and large, this is a project that is focused upon West Bengal, and making the state of West Bengal culturally inclusive, and therefore establishing a very interesting new thought, which is that human beings should have the right to equality before the law. They should have the right of some equality of recognition by their governments, but the idea that they should have a right, as it were, to equality in culture is a very interesting and challenging and original thought, in fact, because culture can be thought of in many different ways, obviously, but it connects to a long-standing interest of mine, which is, what would a democratic culture look like? What would it feel like? What would it be to be in a democratic culture? And my tension there, because in a sense I'm describing tensions that occur to me as I think through these issues, arises from the work of Pierre Bourdieu, who insists that one of the major roles of culture is, in democratic and democratizing societies, is to establish distinction and hierarchy. Okay? So again, I just put that thought before you in order to suggest the complexity of the issues that confront us. I want to just say something, though, a bit more about my earlier remark about inclusiveness and what it's included in, the entity that it's included in. And it relates to the question of locating minority cultures. And clearly locating minority cultures mean, well, who is doing the locating becomes the question there. And to what extent is this location going to be a dislocation or a translation? Now, both of those are important, I mean, are necessary perhaps activities, but I think then about the question of who is benefiting from this relocation, translation, new making, if you like, of a culture. And the reason I raise that question is because I'm very interested in, or no, let me say fearful, that the term minority turns into a straitjacket. It turns into a kind of prison in which certain groups are placed. And when you, in my experience of encountering such minorities in the United Kingdom, one of the things they want to do is to get out of them. Okay? And I think there is evidence of that desire to move out of minority status into something different. I mean, again, it's not clear what it is, because culture is not simply fixed, it's endlessly dynamic and variable, and there's shifting relations of power and expression at every point in them. But that's a thought, anyway, that I think is worth pursuing as we endeavour to establish what seems to me to be the absolutely vital goal of thinking what a democratic culture would be. And if the achievement, if this is something that can be progressed in West Bengal, in my view, then there's a great deal to be learned in Europe and elsewhere about exactly this this achievement, this prospect. Now, there's just two more things I want to say before I finish. One of them has to do with the extent to which the activity that we're engaged in different ways is also an activity of preservation, and that what is important here is to preserve cultures, the cultures that may be on the point of vanishing. They may be on the point of because cultures do vanish. One of Darwin's famous remarks about biological evolution was extinction is commonplace. And I don't know whether the same thing holds true for cultures, whether the extinction of cultures is commonplace. Certainly if I think of the history of Britain, which is the history that I know best, there are numerous cultures that once existed that have become extinct. Okay, and some people talk about this as being the cost of progress or whatever, but it's a fact. It's a historical fact that cultures disappear. So it may be very important to preserve them, presumably preserving them for some future engagement, so that it's like the equivalent of trying to maintain biodiversity. We can maintain, as it were, a rich ecology of knowledge by preserving these languages. But preservation has another sense, another significance too, insofar as it has to do with the establishment of those resources which are precisely of the kind that Pascal Casanova identified in her work on the World Republic of Letters. Namely, in her examples, in the case of establishing national literatures, what was required was not simply, as it were, writers, but things like dictionaries, histories, the addition of texts, very important in the creation of national literatures. And in that sense, again, I think one of the exciting potentials of attending to minority work in this way is the possibilities it creates for a future literature whose precise configuration we do not know, but by the activity of translation, these idioms, these languages are now made available as resources in the creation of a literature that is yet to come. My final thought has to do with this. And it's very much both an ASR, an academic social responsibility, and a university social responsibility thought, and it's the way I see out of some of the dilemmas that I've been hinting at here. And that is that we should think about universities as places that create new communities. It seems to me that there's a potential here, and a potential in the work that we're doing with colleagues at Jadavpur to create new communities, new physical communities, new communities of knowledge, new communities of culture, and that seems to me to be one of the next steps that one might take once one has, as it were, given the work that you're inquiring into and that we're engaged in as well, the respect and the recognition that it deserves. So those are my thoughts, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Cook. Thank you for pointing out the complexities and dilemmas of undertaking such projects like mapping minor intellectual traditions or academic social responsibility. The question is really important: who benefits, and what we are, including those outside into. I mean, will it change the current structure or not? These are important questions, and you have also pointed about the question of preserving, maybe building archives, and here I would like to say that ILSR has already is doing some work in this field. They have already organized one Bhasa Mela last year, in which they invited the practitioners of various languages of West Bengal. They came here, they talked about their language, they performed, they read stories in those languages. This is the way to bring the margin to the mainstream. Maybe this can be one way. So we are learning, and we will go ahead with the cautionary words. So thank you.